Okay, thank you very much. So I am Rolando Bonandrini, and I'm a postdoctoral research fellow. Here with me today is Francis Beveridge, who is a research assistant with me in the lab, guided by Professor Nico Steinbeis. We are based at UCL in the Developmental Change and Plasticity Lab. So the reason we are here today is, first of all, to let you know what we are studying in our lab, which has a neurodevelopmental perspective. So we're interested in the development of cognitive and behavioral abilities in children. This paired with an interest towards the neural changes that occur from a structural and functional point of view in the brain. And the second reason we are here is to invite you to participate to a novel study we are conducting, in which we are aiming at understanding how the development of prosocial behavior occurs. I will get to that more specifically in the slides I have prepared. So more broadly, what we aim at studying is how the ability to think and behave relative to other people unfolds during the course of development, and how that relates to neural changes and ultimately with outcomes in terms of well-being and mental health. So if I may, I would share my screen so I can show you my presentation. Apparently I can't do that at the minute. It says I'm okay. Now I can. Good. So I imagine now you're watching my... Okay. Can I just get confirmation that you're seeing the slides?
Yeah, confirmed.
Okay, thank you. First and foremost, thank you for having us today. We come from Developmental Change and Plasticity Lab, which is this wonderful conglomerate of research assistants, doctoral students, and PhD and postdoc researchers guided by Professor Steinbeis, based at the at UCL in Bloomsbury. What we are particularly interested in this particular phase is social development. Why so? Because we as humans come to the world with a very strong predisposition towards social stimuli. So it was, for instance, observed that newborns come to the world with a strong preference. So they tend to look more at faces that are inherently a social stimulus relative to other stimuli that might be just as complex from a visual point of view. At 6 months, there is the development of the so-called social smile phenomena. So when children and caregivers engage in eye contact, children smile. And this is considered one of the earliest milestones in social development for children. Later, at around 10 months, the mechanisms of joint attention emerge. So caregivers and children can focus on a specific part of reality, so an object, a particular feature, a color. And typically what happens at this point is that the caregiver starts describing it. So a sort of proto-conversation emerges. And this is important not only from the point of view of social development, but also from the point of view of language development. And Around 18 months, mechanisms of prosocial behavior start to be observed. So basically what is possible to see is that children spontaneously, so without being formally asked, may help adults, not necessarily caregivers, while they see adults trying, for instance, to reach out for an object and not being able to do so. Well, children at around this age might start helping them. And at around 3-4 years of age, a theory of mind emerges. This term defines the possibility that children understand that other people may not think or feel just the way as they do. So these are very basic but important milestones in social development, and we believe this is absolutely interesting, especially if related to the fact that us as adults can display quite a complex range of social behaviors and emotions. So we are interested in relating social behavior to development. So of course we have a developmental perspective, but we're not interested only in behavior, but also in the relationship between behavior and neural development from a structural point of view, as a structural and functional point of view, as I was saying before. So by embracing this point of view, this framework, we are able to study and take into account a wide set of phenomena, such as understanding others, decision-making, social emotions, executive functions, self-control, and agency. Why do we do so? Because they all relate to well-being and mental health. Speaking of which, so what is the state of children's mental health in the UK? So according to the NHS National Survey 2018, around 13% of children aged 5 to 19 experience some sort of mental health illness, which might be clustered into emotional or behavioral disorders. And also, there is a slight but steady increase in mental health problems, and this has been so for the last 20 years. And also universities have reported that since 2007, there has been a 5-fold increase in mental health conditions. And this is even without considering COVID. So as you know, since March 2020, there have been repeated lockdowns with, as an outcome, reduced social contact, reduced opportunities for learning, increased burden on families, with, as a result, the possibility of having even more negative outcomes, especially for adolescents and especially for girls. And this is important, is especially so the data about adolescents and girls are particularly related to emotional disorders. Why so? Well, it is believed that the reason why COVID has such negative effects are mediated by loneliness and the quality of sleep that is apparently reduced, and this reduces the possibility to cope with everyday stresses and challenges. Well, we have to consider more in general, even without considering COVID, that adolescence per se represents the peak in developmental terms of emergence of mental health conditions. So it is the moment in life in which mental health disorders tend to emerge more frequently. Why so? Well, the so-called imbalance model provides a possible explanation in this direction. So the idea of this model is that there is an imbalance between the early development of limbic regions in the brain that are those that are necessary to perceive emotions. And this is apparently paired with a late development of prefrontal control regions in the brain. So there is some sort of mismatch in adolescence between the possibility of perceiving emotions with a mature limbic system, but which is not in any way controlled, or at least limited controls, by the prefrontal cortices. So this represents a neurobiological vulnerability of adolescence towards developing, towards being a moment in which mental health disorders emerge. This does not even take into account the particular behavioral challenges that adolescence has. So we're talking about academical requests, so schools requesting more and more effort, social demands, and specific developmental demands, such as maybe being forced to move away from a family to pursue academic interests. So it appears important to relate well-being and mental health with age in order to trace some trajectories that might be more or less positive across development. And as you can see, adolescence in this framework represents a turning point. And what we believe is that it might be important to consider the phase that immediately before adolescence, so childhood, as an age, a moment in which we can intervene to boost those mechanisms that are responsible for better well-being and better outcomes in terms of mental health later in life. That's why we are doing research on this. So given all this, what promotes or what plays a role in well-being and mental health from this developmental point of view? Well, apparently stress plays a role. It's quite intuitive, actually. We know that stress plays a critical role in development. This is mediated in this particular historical moment by social media and, of course, by COVID, but also more broadly, it can be mediated by academic demands. And the consequences from a neurobiological point of view have to do with the neurochemistry in a particular region in the brain, that is the hippocampus, that mediates learning and memory. So the result is that if the levels of stress are too high, the result can be worse performance in learning and memory. But stress per se is not negative. It is actually it's an adaptive response of our body and brain. It is mediated by neurochemical transmitters that are similar to adrenaline. And its ultimate goal is to prepare our brain, our body, to face a challenge. So per se, it's not negative. Actually, it was observed that moderate to low amounts of stress can reduce the negative effects of aging. And provided that stressful events are not too intense, of course, if they are too intense, there's no way but to perceive them as threatening, and that is a bad outcome. But if stresses are not too intense, well, there's always the possibility of considering them and processing them as challenges, and this is can be crucial to face developmental challenges in light of possible later better outcomes in terms of mental health. But to be able to do this, so to process stressing events as challenging, we need to feel in control. So feeling in control is another important factor in this direction. So the self-perceived efficacy is very strong determinant of how we perceive threats. It can determine how well we can bounce back from stressful life events and how well we can use executive functions. I'll get to what executive functions are later, but basically it's a cluster of abilities that allow us to pursue a goal. On the other hand, believing not to be in control of our life is a hallmark of affective disorders such as this, depression and anxiety. So in these conditions, it's not infrequent to observe what is called learned helplessness. So the possibility of experiencing multiple times the association between our attempt at doing some sort of activity, actions, making decisions, and consistently having bad outcomes. So over time, it is possible to learn this association and feel helpless no matter what we do. This is the concept of learned helplessness. And it is quite common in these clinical conditions. But the relationship between the possibility of feeling in control and bouncing back from negative events is also tested experimentally. So this is an experiment on adults. I'll try to make it as intuitive as possible. I'm going to simplify some bits here and there, but mainly in this study there were 3 phases. So adult participants were asked in a first phase to play a computer game in which they had to move a ball into a grid. And as they did so, they perceived, they were administered with very mild electrical shocks. They were not painful, but quite annoying. And there was a group that was given the opportunity to learn that as they moved the ball towards a specific location, they could seize these shocks, whereas the other group was not given this opportunity. So basically what experimenters simulated was a condition in which participants could feel in control and a condition in which participants did not feel in control. Later, they, in the second phase of the study, they were exposed to meaningless images, so it could be symbols or scrambled images. They had no meaning whatsoever, and some of them were paired sometimes with electrical shocks. This was to simulate and generate the association between a negative outcome and an event that was previously neutral. The reason why it was done so is because our brain is wired in such a way that it tries to anticipate the negative outcome, and the result will be the creation of a sort of fear-like response to the previously neutral stimulus. So they did so, and they observed that the 2 groups, the control and no control group, did not differ in this mechanism. But in phase 3, what they did was to try and make the participants unlearn this association. You can do that. So if you present the stimulus that was originally neutral and that has been paired with negative outcome, and you present the originally neutral stimulus without the negative outcome many times, well, this negative association is unlearned. And what they observed was that the group that in the first part of the study felt in control unlearned this negative association better than the group that did not feel in control. So this is an experimental confirmation of the fact that the possibility to bounce back from stressing events is determined in a way by how much we feel in control. In all this, a critical role is played by executive functions. So I was mentioning that in a few slides before. What are those? So basically, executive functions are a set of cognitive operations that allow us to pursue a goal. More specifically, they can be declined into working memory. So to give an example of working memory, I don't know if you remember the pre-copy and paste era on smartphones, but at that time, if you could not write a number on paper, if you had to dial a number you just read, the only chance you had to do that was to read the number and repeat it in your mind. And that mental operation is working memory. So repeating a stimulus and sometimes applying also some sort of manipulation on it is what is called working memory. On the other hand, cognitive flexibility represents the possibility of adapting our way of thinking and behaving dynamically according to the context. So for instance, in a bilingual context, one might desire to talk in a certain language in a certain context and switch to another language in another context. That ability to switch is cognitive flexibility. And also there's self-control. This is pretty self-explanatory as a variable. What is interesting about it is that there has been, from a developmental perspective, a study that I think in the 80s that was very popular, very nice. It's called the Marshmallow Experiment. So in this experiment, there was in a room an experiment with a child and a marshmallow on the table. And the experimenter told the child that the experimenter had to leave the room for a few minutes, and if they when they came back in the room, the marshmallow was still there, so the child didn't eat it, the child would have received the second one. So the whole experiment was focused on the ability to of the child to refrain from eating the marshmallow. And of course it was videotaped and coded, and you can actually see some videos on YouTube. They're very cute, very funny. What experimenters observed at an anecdotal level at first was that children who did better at this task had also better outcomes in terms of academic results. And this result was later paired with more systematic research that revealed how not only executive functions and self-control could predict better outcomes in terms of academic performance, but also in terms of well-being. And it was acting as a factor against negative outcomes such as poverty, substance abuse, and delinquency. What we know about executive functions is that they relate to the activity of prefrontal cortices that we know that mature quite late in the transition between childhood and adolescence. So this gives us the opportunity, so this plasticity of these regions allow us to intervene and try and boost these abilities. And this is what our lab has done in the last few years by proposing an intervention to train executive functions. This was done for 8 weeks, 4 times a week, for 15 minutes each. And there were 2 training groups, an experimental training group in which executive functions were trained, and a control group in which response speed was trained. So response speed meant that they had children just respond to stimuli presented on a computer as fast as they could. The intervention was computer-based, and before and after the intervention, executive functions and reading and maths in terms of academic abilities and achievements were evaluated. And this was done on 2,020 children aged from 6 to 11. And we are still in the process of analyzing these data, but what we can say is that the experimental group had better academic achievements than the control group. Of course, this was in terms of change. So the change in academic scores was greater in the experimental group that was trained in executive function rather than the control group. And this, once again, is a proof of the relationship between executive function and academic abilities, and eventually better outcomes in terms of well-being. The other factor that we believe is absolutely important in this regard, and that in a way glues together all the other factors, and which is exactly the focus of the research I'm about to introduce to you, is social connections. So we know that they are absolutely important. It can be declined in quality of parenting, quality of friendships, with loneliness being a predictor of more negative outcomes. And of course, we know that COVID has a negative effect on social connections. We focus on two particular processes that are empathy, so the possibility of understanding others, and acting pro-socially. It was observed that acting pro-socially has an effect on the size and quality of friendships, and also in results in terms of academic achievements. But what do we mean exactly by pro-social behavior? We mean acting on behalf of others, and current literature on the topic recognizes at least three paradigms of pro-social behavior that are helping, comforting, and sharing. What we know about it is that they tend to develop during the course of time, but what's interesting about it is that they don't develop in the same way. So a child might be prompt in sharing toys, but not just as prompt in doing house chores, or as in the case of my nephew, the other way around. Also, we know that children tend to know what the rules are that govern pro-social behavior, although they might not always act according to them. There are still many things we don't know about pro-social behavior just as yet. First of all, we don't know how pro-social behavior does really change and what explains how pro-social behavior changes. The reason why we don't know these things is probably due to the fact that research laboratories across the world tend to focus on specific age ranges. This is also a practical necessity from a certain point of view, because typically research relies on behavioral tasks that are basically games. And of course, trying to devise games that are just as engaging to a 3-year-old and a 10-year-old is quite difficult. Whereas on the other hand, research typically and research studies in this context have typically focused on just one type of pro-social behavior. So what we aim at doing in our study is bridging these gaps and studying kids from 3 to 6 year olds and exploring all three paradigms of pro-social behavior, so helping, sharing, comforting, but also exploring a set of possible mechanisms that promote their behavior. So these mechanisms could be emotion comprehension and regulation, empathy, knowledge of pro-social rules, neural development, cognitive control behavior, and the ability to attribute thoughts to other people. This is done to try and understand which mechanisms promote the development of pro-social behavior, with the goal of trying and acting on these mechanisms to ultimately promote better outcomes in terms of well-being. What happens during the visit? So the next slides are basically an invitation to come to UCL and take part to our study. So we would invite children and families to come to UCL. We are based at the Psychology and Language Sciences building in Bedford Way in Bloomsbury. We would invite you to come twice, 1 year apart. And for all children, there would be 2 hours of behavioral tests that are basically games. Some of them are computer games, others are more activity-based. And just for 5-6 year olds, there would be also a neuroimaging part of the study. So there would be a brain scan done via MRI. We're quite lucky in this regard because the MRI facility is in the same building as we are, and in the same building in which we do the behavioral tests. And also the neuroimaging unit has gathered years and years of experience in testing kids. So it's a very child-friendly neuroimaging unit. On the other hand, I'm pretty sure you're wondering how we are keeping safe during COVID-19. So our lab has enough room. It will be sanitized before and after each session. It is aired between sessions. We have protective screens. It is compliant with our internal COVID-19 protocols. And we, as experimenters, always take lateral flow tests before every appointment. We'll be wearing masks and gloves. We'll maintain social distances, and of course, we will keep your child's safety and your safety as a priority. If you would like to be involved, we have some information and consent forms they would like to send out. Read it carefully, discuss it with your child, and ask us as many questions as you might have, either by telephone or email. And if you'd like to participate, just fill in the forms that we'll disseminate through the school. We will then arrange a call and ask a few screening questions in order to arrange a date for the first and second lab visit. We are starting in February 2022. So from that moment on, we can arrange a visit. So what is it that we and you get out of it? Just to be as transparent as we can possibly be. So we do what is called basic research. It's not that basic actually, but what we try and outline is what defines pro-social development. This will be done to inform later and future interventions to boost pro-social behavior, with the ultimate goal to improve trajectories in terms of mental health across development. More practically, what we do with the data we collect is to anonymize and analyze them and make sense of them and write a scientific paper that will be published on a scientific journal and disseminated through conferences. What you can get out of it is a very nice experience for children and families. So this is the type of comment we have from families who come. Sometimes we have older siblings who come to participate because they, younger siblings who come to participate because they had older brothers or sister who had participated to other experiments, and they also wanted to see how a science lab looks like. And so this might also set the spark maybe in the future for some interest in science, who knows. And of course, we're open to presentations and workshops just as this one for children, parents and teachers. I would like to highlight also that this project is part of a cooperative project between UCL and specifically Professor Steinbeis and other two centers in Canada. So Concordia University with the research group led by Professor Dunfield, and University of Munich, Germany, with a research group guided by Professor Paulus. So we believe this cooperative framework can make our research project very rich from a theoretical point of view. So I finished my presentation. I'm more than ready to answer all your questions, and in case you have other questions, please do email us and we'll answer as quickly as possible. Thank you.